Good morning, and welcome to one and all. It's Wednesday morning, 9 o'clock, and it's time for some practical Parsha. To take the lessons of the weekly Parsha and relate it and apply it to our lives on a practical level. So thank you all for joining. I see people are logging on now, whether it's on Facebook Live or YouTube Live. Thanks all for your greetings. Keep them coming. Your Boker Tov and good morning greetings. Thank you all. And those of you that are going to be logging on later on to watch this, welcome and thank you for joining us. Please do share your comments and questions along as we go along the way. I'd like to share them and engage with you. Share your comments, share your questions. If there are any questions along the way, feel free to share them. We'd love to engage with you. Oh, keep those comments coming, guys. Keep the comments coming. I'm enjoying this. It's great to see you all logging on and sharing. Thank you very much. Keep that going. So, while Judaism is so respectful of the nations of the world, and we acknowledge how everybody is a creation of God, no matter their background, no matter their religion, no matter which nation they're born into or which religion they're born into, everyone is respected and recognized to be an equal and part of Hashem's world. That being said, when the Jews were told to go into Israel and they had to remove all of Canaan, all of Canaan, the nation of Canaan, here we have an interesting terminology and concept of a cursed nation. A cursed nation. Arur is the word, a cursed nation. Canaan is known as a cursed nation. And therefore was the obligation of the Jewish people as they came into the land of Israel to remove all of the Canaanites, Canaan, from the country, from the land. Arur Canaan. Canaan is a cursed nation. I mentioned that in the context of Eliezer. We know that the servant of Abraham was Eliezer. He's the one that went to go find a wife for Yitzchak. He's the one that Abraham sent back to Mesopotamia, to Haran, to search for a wife. And you know that Eliezer was a Canaanite. Eliezer was part of Canaan. He was quite unique because he was dedicated and committed to Avraham Avinu. He believed in monotheism as Abraham taught him. So he was committed and he was dedicated to Abraham. But at the end of the day, he was a Canaanite. And the Canaanite nation, as we know, were Arur, were cursed. And so Eliezer came from that. By the mere fact that he was born into the nation of Canaan, he was Arur. He was cursed, as was all of the nation of Canaan. That being said, the Zohar says something very, very interesting, which is the theme of today. Our title of today is Choose Your Friends Wisely. Well, listen to what the Zohar says. The Zohar says that because he served Abraham, and because he was so dedicated to Abraham, to a tzaddik, to a righteous man, a believing person, a believing man, because he was so dedicated to Abraham with such complete faith, the Zohar says, he left the realm of Arur, and he moved, which means cursed, and he moved into the category of Baruch, which means blessed. You hear that? Because he was dedicated and committed to Abraham, he moved from the category of Arur, of being cursed, and he was now in the category of Baruch, of being blessed. Interesting. Eliezer was known for many other things too. Eliezer was known for his good deeds. Eliezer did many mitzvot, many good deeds. He was shown by Abraham, his master, of how to do these things. But that's not why he walked in or entered into the category of being blessed. Not just because he did good things. Because at the end of the day, he was a Canaanite. And a Canaanite is a Canaanite. According to the Torah definition, a Canaanite is a cursed nation, whether they do good or they don't, whether the individuals do good or they don't. Canaan in its own right was Arur, was cursed. And we weren't allowed to marry from the Canaanites and even allow them to stay in the land of Israel. And even though Eliezer was one of the Canaanites, but yet he was doing good deeds and he was performing mitzvot, that wasn't good enough to change his category of being cursed to blessed. What was the defining transition? What moved Eliezer from being cursed to being blessed? Says the Zohar, it was the fact that he was connected to Abraham Avinu. That's unbelievable. He's connected to Abraham. Because he was connected to Abraham, that's why he was transformed from being Arur to being Baruch, from being cursed to being blessed. And today we're going to try to unpack this principle, this concept of the Zohar. The attachment of Eliezer to Abraham was transformative. His mitzvot, I'm sure, were very positive. His good deeds were good, but that wasn't the transformation. There wasn't the transformation of Abraham. It was connecting to, of Eliezer. It was connecting to Abraham. I want to highlight something else before we get going on this concept of choosing your friends. Eliezer had a desire, an aspiration. Eliezer had a daughter, and Abraham had a son, Yitzchak. Abraham wanted to marry off his son Yitzchak, and Eliezer said, I have a daughter. So why can't your son marry my daughter? That was Eliezer's suggestion. Let the two marry each other. What's wrong? We work so closely to each other. I live in your home. I'm connected. Let my daughter marry your son. Interestingly, Abraham did not allow that. Because at the end of the day, they were Canaanites. And that itself needs to be understood. What was wrong with the daughter of Eliezer? We say Arur Canaan, that Canaan is cursed. And so Abraham could not allow for Yitzchak to marry this daughter. But the Zohar is telling us that Eliezer became blessed. Eliezer moved out of the category of being cursed to the category of being blessed because he was close to Abraham. So then why can't Abraham give his son to marry Eliezer's daughter? We'll come back to the question a little bit later. There's a concept that the rabbis teach us. And let me say it in Hebrew and I'll translate it too. Kol hamechubar latahor, tahor. Whoever is connected to the pure becomes pure. Meaning, if you are engaged, if you are connected to the pure, you'll automatically become pure. We find that by Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu is called Eved Hashem, the servant of Hashem. Avdi Moshe, my servant Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu had many advantages, many great qualities. He was Moshe Rabbeinu, is the greatest teacher of all time. But what was Moshe's best quality? The fact that he was Eved Hashem. Because he was connected to the godliness, to the pure, to Tahor, that was Moshe Rabbeinu's best quality. You are connected to God. If you are connected to God, then you are godly too. If you are connected to the pure, then you are pure too. Because your environment, we now know, is positive. The environment, your friends, your family, your social environment is one of purity. That means you're pure too. Many people ask me the question, what's wrong if I choose to daven at home? I'm not talking about during COVID specifically, but even before, and please God, after COVID. At home, I concentrate more. At home, I'm focused more. At shul, it's distracting, it's disturbing, and there's so many distractions taking place around me. And I once heard a beautiful idea. When we daven on our own, Hashem analyzes us for who we are, individually. What's your background? What's your conduct? What's your thoughts? What's your intent? There's so much. We go through one of these machines, these scanning machines. You know, in the airports, when you walk through, there was big issues with that when they launched that initially because people look naked. People felt uncomfortable. So when we daven on our own, Hashem analyzes us on our own. But when we daven at shul, it's different because now God looks at the entire minyan as a whole. He's not analyzing individuals. And yes, it may be distracting. And yes, there may be disturbances. But the advantage of saying Amen Yeheshmei Rabbah or davening the Amidah or davening in a minyan is extremely powerful because God is now looking at the whole. He's looking at the group. And now you're judged very differently. In other words, when you attach yourself to something holy, you become holy. Even though we may have our own shortfalls or problems or difficulties, the moment I'm part of an environment, part of a social group, part of a minyan that's doing what's right, that's doing what's holy, I automatically become holy like that too. The rabbis point out something interesting. That the following principle, Yafeh sichasan shel avdei avos, mitoroson shel bonim. The talk and discussion, the chit-chat of the servants of the avos, meaning Eliezer, is greater than the Torah of the children of Abraham. Meaning the chit-chat of the servant of the avos is better than the Torah of the avos, of the forefathers' own children. Why? How do we know that? Because Eliezer's story this week in Parsha Chayei Sarah, as Abraham sends Eliezer to go find a wife for Yitzchak, the amount of pages that the Torah takes to describe the story of Eliezer going to find this wife is immense. It's huge, this topic in this week's Parsha. Whereas when it comes to the own children of Abraham, the own Jewish people, God is so brief and concise in the Torah. So we learn from here that the chit-chat of the servants is greater than the Torah of the children. How's that possible? Does that make sense? Well, the terminology is the servants of the Avos, Avdei Avos. When the servants are dedicated to the forefathers, when the servants are attached to the Avos, there's a level of connection there. The servants actually are elevated to a higher level than even the children, because the children are seeking their own independence. The children of Abraham, the next generations of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the next generations are seeking their own independence. And therefore, they're not always going to be connected continuously to the source of life, to the source of Abraham Avinu. And therefore, something's lacking in a way, because the more the generations move on, the more distant we become from the patriarchs, from the matriarchs. But the Avdei Avos, but the servants of the forefathers, such as Eliezer, who continuously remained connected and dedicated and devoted to Avraham Avinu, never wanting to seek independence, always wanting to remain connected to him and connected to the family of the forefathers. Therefore, even his chit-chat, even the random mundane discussions, we want to listen to. The Torah elaborates on the story of Eliezer. You know why? Because Eliezer was so dedicated, so connected to the source of life, to Avraham Avinu, that we want to hear what Eliezer did. Because whoever is connected to the pure automatically becomes pure. If you're connected to the tzibur, to the congregation, to the community, you automatically become holy. The community is holy, you become holy. The moment we start picking up on individuals, what do they do, what don't they do, how involved are they, how involved are they not, then you start seeing, well, who's holy and who's not holy. But the moment we attach ourselves to a community, to a tzibur, and the whole community is holy, no question, automatically we become holy in that process too. And that was Eliezer. How much good Eliezer did or how much good Eliezer didn't do, that's debatable. He came from the nation of Canaan, that's clear. But the fact that he was attached to Abraham, and everything Abraham did was with Eliezer's involvement, Eliezer automatically was upgraded, automatically was seen to be different, automatically entered the category of being blessed. This explains the concept of connecting to tzaddikim, connecting to the righteous people, connecting to great rebbes, teachers, Rosh Yeshiva, Gedolim, and the great giants and teachers of the world. This is something that was taught in the Hasidic sects, but also in the Sephardi groups and communities. And this is now filtered through even into the Ashkenaz Litvisha communities too. The greatness of a Rosh Hashiva, the greatness of a Godol, the greatness of a great person. We want to be in their environment. We want to attach ourselves to their way. We want to daven in their presence. We want to learn in their presence. There's such a thirst and a yearning of people, of laymen, of average individuals like you and I, that want to attach ourselves to the great of all great, to great tzaddikim. This weekend, is known as the Kinus HaShluchim weekend. It always takes place, the gathering of shluchim from internationally always takes place on the weekend of Shabbos Mevorchim Kislev. We bless the new month of Kislev this Shabbos. Unfortunately, it's not going to be held live in New York due to COVID-19 protocol and regulations, but rather it's going to be held as a virtual conference internationally with all rabbis and shluchim from around the world. But the shluchim know very well, and this is why it's held in New York on an annual basis. Because the shluchim know very well that the success that they have in their communities, building up their communities, touching Yidden, establishing their institutions, the success that they have is not their success. It's quite amazing. Because in the secular world, the more you do, the more you accomplish, the more successful you are. But Torah doesn't teach that. We know the more successful we are is dependent, or our success is dependent on the connection to the tzaddik. If you understand who the Rebbe was, what the Rebbe wanted of his shluchim, of the world, and you try to align yourself to his thinking, understanding his values, understanding his motto, understanding his purpose, understanding what he wanted, how to behave, how to conduct ourselves, what the values, what the principles, what the standards are. The more that a shliach, the more that a rabbi is connected to his Rebbe, the more successful he will be in his work. The more independent he wants to be, well, then he's judged as an individual. And as an individual, he does good, he does bad, he's strong, he's weak. That's already more dangerous. But the success and the blessings of God will come to him when he is connected. As we say in Hebrew, mekushar, connected to his Rebbe, connected to his source of inspiration. When he's connected to his Rebbe, when he's able to plug in and to synchronize his behavior with the Rebbe's value system, then he'll be successful. It really touches me so much when Rabbi Sachs, Zichrona Livracha, who we mourn the loss of and the passing of this week. Rabbi Sachs in the last few years has been talking a lot about the inspiration the Rebbe gave him to become a rabbi and then to become a chief rabbi and to do what he did and to touch so many around the world. And the way Rabbi Sachs describes in his speeches and his lectures about how he dropped everything of his aspirations. He thought he would go into economics. He thought he would go into finance. He thought he would go into politics. He thought he would go into philosophy. And the Rebbe said, not this, not this, not this, but maybe you should consider becoming a rabbi and influencing the world and influencing other younger rabbanim too. And for Rabbi Sachs to drop all that is inspirational. You know why? Because whoever attaches themselves to the pure will become pure. If you want to be successful, don't run your own life. Don't make your own decisions. Try to align yourself with people who are holy, people who are pure, because then the inspiration filters down to us too. And we get to benefit from their purity and their holiness. Whether it's the purity of the community, as I explained earlier, whether it's the purity of a tzaddik, of a righteous person, that purity, that holiness influences me, and I get taken away and I get uplifted. So Rabbi Sachs associates his successes of the rabbinate to aligning himself with the request of the Rebbe. When the Rebbe said to me, maybe you should consider the rabbinate, I did that. Later on, he said, but don't worry, I didn't lose out because I received many honors and many awards and many doctorates in the fields of economics and philosophy and politics. As he said in his speech to the shluchim about 8-9 years ago when he spoke at the banquet in New York, he said, you don't lose out. When you follow the will of God, when you follow the will of the Rebbe and you join the rabbinate, you don't lose out on your personal aspirations. They'll come too. And they came to him as well. So when we attach ourselves to holy people, we become holy too. And that was the story of Eliezer. He attached himself to his Rebbe, to Avraham Avinu. And just by mere fact of being connected to Avraham, he too became holy in the process too. Let me share with you something from Hallel. You're all familiar with the Hallel wording. In Hallel, we say, Ani avdecha, I'm your servant, ben amatecha, the son of your maidservant. That's what David HaMelech says. Why can't I just say, Ani avdecha, I'm your servant? Why must it say, Ani avdecha, ben amatecha, the son, your servant, the son of your maidservant? So Reb Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk, one of the great Hasidic masters, gives the following mashal, the following parable. He says, imagine you have a servant who you acquired, who you bought with money. Initially, he is loyal and dedicated. But eventually he starts to fight for his own identity. And you as a master have to figure out ways. How do you keep him? How do you make sure he doesn't run away? How do you make sure he remains loyal to you? That's one type of servant. Another type of servant is one who's born in the home. His mother is the maidservant of your house. He is born in the courtyard. There's no concern of him running away. This is what he knows. This is his comfort zone. This is where he's comfortable. So therefore, David HaMelech, King David says in Hallel, Ani avdecha ben amatecha. I'm your servant, the son of your maidservant. You know, because we are like born in your courtyard. We're not looking to run away. We're not looking for independence. We're not looking to be on our own. We want to remain with you, the king. Our mother is the maidservant. We've been born into your environment. We're not running away. We're remaining connected to you. Because we know that when we are connected to you, that is the source of life. That is the source of holiness. That's when I become tahor in the process too. And so when it comes to our friends too, Chazal tell us that when you have a good neighbor, you become good. Choose your neighbors wisely. Choose your friends wisely too. It's not necessarily because the two neighbors directly interact. It's not necessarily because the two neighbors know each other. But by the mere fact that we live in the same environment, it creates an atmosphere of kedusha. It creates an atmosphere of holiness. And therefore, my good neighbor will have influence on me. And please God, I'll have influence on them. It may be directly, or it may be indirectly by osmosis, by the mere fact that we're sitting next to each other, or we live side by side with each other, that eventually will filter across. And so we tell our children that. When our children go to school, we try to encourage our children to interact with the good children, with the holy children, with the children that are tuned in and plugged in, that are well-behaved and well-mannered and come from stable homes. That's what we try to do, right? So why are we any different as adults? As adults also, we should choose our environment, because when we choose our environment, automatically affects us. As I said, when we fight for our own independence, we're judged on our own. When Eliezer is judged on his own, yeah, he's a Canaanite, and cursed are the Canaanites. But the moment Eliezer attaches himself to Abraham, Abraham's holy, Eliezer becomes holy. The moment we have neighbors that are positive and they're holy and are tuned in and are moral and mention, automatically that affects us too. The moment we join together as part of a tzibur, part of a congregation, I may not be perfect, I may have my shortcomings and my pros and cons, but the moment I'm part of a tzibur, part of a congregation, I become holy too. And this explains the Zohar's comment of Eliezer. He did great deeds, great mitzvot, but he was an individual who was a Canaanite. But the fact that he was connected to Abraham, to a tzaddik, to a holy man, automatically this brought him in to the category of being Baruch. I asked the question earlier, what about Eliezer's daughter? Why wasn't Eliezer's daughter allowed to marry Yitzchak? That would have been the greatest shidduch in town. Abraham and Eliezer's children marrying one another. And the answer is like this. At the end of the day, the family were Canaanites. And Canaanites, we couldn't marry. We still can't marry. Eliezer is the one, says the Zohar, that attached himself to Abraham and thereby became Baruch, became blessed. but his daughter didn't. She didn't have that level of connection. We don't know that or not. She didn't plug herself in to the atmosphere of Abraham. And as a result, the daughter of Eliezer, although Eliezer may be considered Baruch, according to what the Zohar says, Eliezer was Baruch, but his daughter may not have been, because his daughter didn't have this attribute of plugging in to Avraham Avinu and that family. That's my own thought process to try to explain this, because then we have a contradiction. If we don't explain this, we've got a problem. Eliezer is considered Baruch, is considered blessed, so why can't Abraham give his child to Eliezer's daughter? So my logic says, well, Eliezer is the one that attached himself to Abraham, but his daughter may not have. And the moment you're not connected, you're not plugged in to the right person, to the right people, to the right environment, you don't become blessed. And so they say you can't choose family. That's true. But you can choose friends. And let's make sure that we choose the right friends. Friends that have influence over us. Friends that inspire us. Let's choose the right rabbis who can inspire us and motivate us and connect us to the will of God and to the way of proper and moral living. Thank you all for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you back here next Wednesday, 9 o'clock, for our practical Parsha sessions. Wish you a successful and productive week ahead, and all the best.